MEPs have pushed for tough certification showing the origin of minerals used by manufacturers of our everyday goods. They're worried the metals, gold, tin, tungsten and tantalum may originate from conflict zones like the Democratic Republic of Congo, and that the trade may be fueling the conflict itself. But is the decision to go for mandatory due diligence, affecting hundreds of thousands of businesses potentially in Europe, a step too far? The MEP steering the file through Parliament, Winkler, thinks so. Let me ask you first of all, Mr. Winkler, people talk sort of quite a lot about conflict minerals and conflict diamonds, but I'm just wondering if you can give me some specific examples of the sort of problems out there that you here in Europe want to address.
It's the situation that you can find on the ground, for example, in DRC, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I want to emphasize, just between brackets, that the regulation proposed by the Commission does not refer to a specific country, but to all possible conflict areas also in future. But now the most well-known and the most tragic situation is in Congo, and you can see there that there are so-called artisanal mines, so-called informal miners, people who are working in the worst possible condition to extract minerals which are traded, which then are smelted, and which are transformed in metals, which are components for our, I would say, everyday life here in Europe. You have to find the point when where you can intervene more specifically, and this point, from my point of view and in the Commission's proposal, are the smelters, because before smelting the minerals can be traced. After exiting the smelter, you have a metal which is quite neutral and cannot be traced back to the origins.
What then do you think the politicians who were opposing you, who wanted far stricter due diligence conditions on everybody who is using these metals, what then do you think they could achieve?
Impact studies of the European Commission show us that if you come with an unprepared and unilaterally imposed regulation which is mandatory for everybody, that means 900,000 companies in the European Union, then you might have problem. You might have a shortage on the market, you might have price distortion, and you might have a very negative effect, one unwanted but negative, that smuggling increases, that illegal and informal trade increases, and that people will simply avoid those regions that are under some EU regulations which are too aggressive, too oppressive towards the business background. What I want is that once we have identified all the stakeholders, and we did this, what I want and what I would like to obtain is the effect of educating the stakeholders, the effect of joint responsibility.
It's well known that the most recent Sakharov Prize winner, Dr. Mukwege, who has a hospital for victims, female victims of conflict in Democratic Republic of Congo, weighed into this whole debate, demanding that European politicians put human rights in Africa or in conflict areas over their own economic interests. How much influence do you think that had on MEPs?
It had a great influence, and it also had a great influence on myself, so we don't have to confuse here things.
What was the influence? What did it tell you?
For me, it told that I have to work on a piece of legislation that is realistic, that is implementable, and that can be implemented in a realistic time frame, because we don't work for something that should be implemented in 7 years or in 8 years. We have to do something today. That was the effect of Dr. Mukwege's activism on myself. And I know very well that from the good intentions towards the practical reality, there is a very long way.
Can you give me concrete examples of how useful these minerals are in everyday life now, in everyday equipment that we use, but also in the industries of the future?
We have those metals in everything we touch in our day-by-day life, because communication, electronics, household equipment, cars and planes are everyday life for most of the Europeans, for the huge majority of the Europeans. Speaking about aeroplanes, I would give you an example which was given to me by industry, that when you want, if you have a mandatory due diligence process and you want to certify every company on the upstream and downstream, then for building a transatlantic plane, you have to collect something close to 1 million certificates.
Just one very quick final thought. I mean, your task now is to try and persuade your colleagues here in Parliament of your position while you still have time. How will you do that?
My task is to find a common ground with the co-legislators, with the European Council, with the Member States, and with the European Commission. I am very worried about the fact that now we are so far, by the vote today in the European Parliament, we got so far from the intentions, as long as I know them correctly, of the European Council and of the Member States, that it will be a very difficult negotiating process, but we have to do our best to push through this piece of legislation.
It seems to be coming.